Well, welcome to Keys of the Kingdom. I'm Brother Gregory, and we're going to be talking again about the Kingdom of God. And it's been a busy day, busy week. Lots of things exchanged on the Living Network. Not a lot in the Google Network, which is our different Google groups based on geography. They were really active at one time, but now they're not always that active. There's a little bit of exchanges there because you don't want to just be on the Google groups. It's a great way in which to send out announcements to the entire network because they can go out instantly, and you don't have to worry about being filtered out by the different filtering agents because you're already subscribed to those groups, and so we can give information out quickly. But the real Living Network is people connected with other people. You know, there are people in congregations, they talk with their ministers, they talk with each other, they talk with people outside of their congregation that are just out in the world, and then these conversations, these interactions, these ways in which we relate to one another are shared with the ministers, and the ministers also meet and they discuss these things and try to resolve different issues. There's some people wanting to put out flyers, and so the ministers talk about that, and they share ideas, and they share different ways to approach that issue. And we've had thousands of flyers put out. I've, of course, been putting out thousands and thousands of booklets for years and years and years, and I've gotten calls from the Ural Mountains. I remember early on, and I couldn't even figure out how in the world did one of my pamphlets get into the Ural Mountains. Other calls from people who were over at somebody's house, and they saw one of our pamphlets on the coffee table, and they picked it up, and they started reading, and they were fascinated. And they wanted more information, and they called me up. And we give them that information for free. Talk on the phone for hours when people call up. But if you don't join the network, if you don't start networking together as if you're looking for the kingdom, because that's what you're supposed to be doing, is seeking the kingdom of God, the government of God. See the word kingdom? That means government. Basilius in the Greek. So the government of God is at hand, and you're supposed to be seeking it and its righteousness. Unfortunately, a lot of people think you're supposed to be seeking some kind of doctrine, some kind of interpretation of the Bible, some sort of private interpretation of the Bible, their own private. So they go around, they shop for churches that have their interpretation, what they feel comfortable with. I got up early this morning and I listened to a number of different preachers, pastors, whatever you want to call them, who were talking about the apostate church. And I clicked on a few of the videos, and one of them was talking about the Trinity. And, that you have to believe that Jesus was God, and that the Holy Spirit is God, and that God the Father is God, and they're distinct. And he goes through and he starts analyzing the Greek words and explaining all this stuff. But I went on his website and I looked for his church to see what his church is doing. They don't take care of the social welfare of the people in their congregations. Oh, they got people signing on and they live stream their sermons, and everybody loves it. I loved your sermon. It meant so much to me. It made me feel so good, because it was just what I needed to hear. But you're still not taking care of one another through faith, hope, and charity. If your parents have needs, you send them to men who exercise authority, one over the other. You don't take care of your parents. You don't provide for your parents. You send them to the government, and the government forces your neighbor and borrows against the future of your children to provide those benefits, and we explain all that. So you may think your sermons are what people need to hear. You may go on for hours and talk about the apostate church and gay marriages and preachers who are gay and that accept this immorality or that immorality, whatever it is. I don't know. There's probably a long list of things And one of the preachers said, every day you hear about some minister who absconded with funds and ran off with one of the other women in his congregation, and he says, this is the apostate church. Well, those are sinners. No, there's no two ways about that. But the apostate church is a lot more. And that's just about every church out there, because they're under a strong delusion. They're actually hypocrites. They say they love Jesus, but they won't do what he said to do, which is to take care of one another through faith, hope, and charity in the perfect law of liberty. That's what you're supposed to be doing. They actually are out there preaching, there's nothing you have to do, you just have to accept this private interpretation of the gospel according to Steve. You know, the gospel according to Bob. You know, that's not what you have to do. You have to accept the gospel according to Jesus Christ. And he talked about those who are covetous. He talked about those who, you know, sing the song and do the dance but don't pay the fiddler. You know, the foolish virgins. They don't do the job. And it's so clear. I mean, when he said, make the people sit down in these congregations of 10, and those congregations of 10 rank themselves in congregations of 10, which is 100, times 50, which is 5,000, which there were 5,000 people there at that time. That they had to do that, or there would be no loaves and fishes. And they did it, and it probably took a while to do. Because, I mean, it's not an instantaneous thing. You had to sit down in the... Actually, what was common, and I always remember seeing this in a Malaysian village, a film of a Malaysian village where the elders of the village all sat down in a circle to discuss and decide something that was important to the whole village. And behind each man, old man who was sitting in the circle, there were a couple other men, undoubtedly their sons. And this circle was going to make a decision that was going to affect almost everybody in one way or another in the village. It wasn't going to rule over them. They were just deciding where to put a well. Somebody was going to drill a well for that village so they would have fresh water, because there was a problem with drinking water in that village. And it would save lives, and it would be a convenience to the health of the village. And so they had to decide. The leader couldn't decide. The people had to decide. And so they all sat down in these circles. And, of course, we've done shows explaining that the word church actually comes from a word that actually meant circles. People will say, oh, no, it came from, you know, this Greek god. Well, yeah, there is connection to that, but, you know, even the Greek gods, you know, the Greeks would gather in circles. You know, why was the hoplite shield round? I always wondered that. Why was their shields round? It's not very practical. But anyway, I won't tell you why they were round. But anyway, the truth is, we're all in a bit of an apostasy. We've all strayed from the message that Christ brought, which is the message that Moses brought, which is the message that Abraham brought, and it was the message that Melchizedek was telling people. There's not much in the Bible about Melchizedek. Most people don't even know who he is. Traditionally, the Jews knew for centuries that Melchizedek was Shem, who, according to biblical chronology, was still alive at the time of Abraham. And they go through a great deal of trouble to say that, you know, that the kingdom was passed down. The right to be the prince of the kingdom was passed down from generation to generation. So how was it passed to Abraham? Well, it was passed to Abraham by Melchizedek, who was Shem. Well, Abraham was 9 generations away from Shem, so he just jumped over all those others. Now, there's an actual bloodline generation to Abraham. But what was the thing about Abraham? Abraham could have been ruler in Haran, and he left Haran. Abraham could have owned all the stuff that he had conquered in this overnight battle where he defeated these kings that were defeating Sodom and Gomorrah and other city-states. He could have kept all that stuff, but he wouldn't keep any of it for himself. We see the same process in Gideon. We see the same process in Jesus Christ, who, though he was rich, he was not a poor, humble carpenter. His father wasn't a carpenter. He was probably a stonemason, and he was probably a major contract builder. Probably helped build some of the buildings in Caesarea. Yeah, I say probably, but that's, you don't have to believe that. It's not a matter of faith. What you do have to believe is the character of Christ, who did not come to rule over you but to serve. And this is the difference between the kings of the world and the kings of the kingdom of God. There is no king in Israel. There was no king in Israel. Every man did what was right in his own eyes. And some men, in their eyes, they thought this was right, and it wasn't. And so that man suffered the consequences of his choices. And that's called liberty. It's called freedom. And, of course, God wants you to be free souls under his authority. Those who conform to the character of God, to the way of God, to the Spirit of God, who accepted the Spirit of God in their hearts. You see, God's trying to tell you what's right and wrong all the time. He's speaking it out into existence through the voice of God. It's everywhere in nature. It's passing through you like neutrinos from space. But there's no place for it to light in your heart because you won't even repent. You have to think this different way. Repenting is thinking a different way. And so you have to think that it's not okay to force my neighbor to contribute to my welfare. All these preachers talking about apostate church, they think that's okay. They think it's okay to go to the kingdoms of the world and ask the rulers of the world, because they're all part of the world. They're not separate from the world. They think it's okay to ask them to take care of me, send me some Social Security check, take care of my parishioners with welfare, take care of my parishioners with money that I know you took from their neighbors, take care of them with money you borrowed from the future. That's what's so amazing, is that the money they take from your neighbor is not to provide you with benefits. The money that you pay in taxes, that doesn't provide you with benefits. That pays the interest on the loan because they borrowed from the future. People don't get that. But that's not keeping the Sabbath. The Sabbath is working first, not borrowing against the future and then having to pay it back. The Sabbath is working first, earning your day of rest, and taking your day of rest. You don't do that. I don't know how many Sabbath keepers don't understand that it's basic. The Sabbath is a way. There is 10 commandments that can be summed up in 2 commandments. And there are, 700, 690, there's different ways that people count them, the statutes of Moses. The statutes of Moses are just trying to explain to you the 10 Commandments. And we just talked in a program, I was just editing it before I was actually out. I loaded a couple 1,000 pounds of wool this morning, and it's going off to the people who process the wool. It's going down the highway right now. Late last night I was changing a swather tire, or at least taking it off. I'll have to go get another swather tire because the old one is just disintegrated to toast. And so it's been busy, but I still got up, 5 o'clock, and started to ponder these questions as to what is the apostate church? What is church? And in the last few minutes before I went on, I was using that time to edit some shows that we've done on this network and other networks, and we'll release everything through the Living Network and through the email network so that you can hear them for free. But one show which I kind of named Avatar. Avatar is actually a Hindu god, but we all use the word avatar. That's your image. That's what you put on the internet to represent, kind of a little icon that represents your personality. And everybody's got a little, if you're on Facebook or if you play games or whatever, they all have their little avatar. And that's supposed to represent your character. But it's made up, what's like the song, "You're better online." So who are you really? What is the truth about your character really? Are you really a Christian? People think I'm too hard on people, that I should be more compassionate and talk, because I'm so critical. And then, we did a little study, and it's in the Avatar show on Mark 7. And that they ask a simple question. They go up to Jesus, and they says, "How come your apostles don't wash hands like it says in our ordinances, our laws, our traditions?" is the way we translate it, but it's actually the word for ordinance in the Greek. And if you understood the Pharisees, they had rules. You break these rules, you're in trouble. You could be fined. I mean, already their korban, their sacrifice, was compelled by Molokai and Gabai, who would go around and pace off your grain field to determine how much grain they were to receive from you, what they were to get from you, because the tithing was compelled under the Pharisees. Everybody had to pay their fair share. But Christ wanted you to do it through faith, hope, and charity. They wanted you to do it through taxes, through the king. That was the foolish thing of Saul. It was foolish that the people wanted a king, of rulers who could exercise authority. That's another thing a minister brought up, and I haven't really responded to it, but he was talking about kings and stuff. There are kings who are not putting themselves in position. There were kings who were not putting themselves in the position of the Father, because Jesus said, "Call no man Father upon the earth." And they would not do certain things that most rulers today, most governments today do regularly. And there were 5 of these things, and they're mentioned in Deuteronomy. And we were told that if you ever have a king, you should write these things down and read them to him every day. And see, you don't understand that. Your preachers don't understand that. They don't understand. We wrote a whole book on it, Contracts, Covenants, and Constitutions. And there's a whole chapter in there that go through these 5 parameters that you need to put in the Constitution that you read to your rulers, restricting their power and authority. Because otherwise they'll end up taking, like it says in Samuel 8. And of course, of those 5 things, only one has been put into the Constitution of the United States. And I could go through and list them to you, but if your government has the power to do these 5 things, if the leaders that you elect can violate any of these 5 things, then it's not a Christian government. It's not a godly government. It's not ordained by God. It's ordained by you, and God allows you to make those choices, and you probably make covenants with that ruler, or at least that government of that ruler, because, rulers die, and then they elect somebody else to be in that office. So you're actually making covenants with those governments, not with that individual. He's an enforcer of that covenant, but your covenant is your contract, your social contract, your whatever you want to call it, social compact, is with the government. And a lot of people want to go around saying, oh, I've never signed anything. Well, I don't know anybody who hasn't ever signed anything. So everybody signed something. And it doesn't really matter. Rights and freedoms are inherited from your parents. Like those elders sitting in a circle making a decision. Whatever decision they make, they could get input from their son who's sitting behind them. They could get input from their son. But it's the elders who are going to come into agreement. Because even in that primitive village, they understood that the son doesn't have any say-so until his father dies. And then he moves up. Then now because he's under his father's hierarchy, which is a good thing. Now, it could be used badly, but not without consequences. You know, that's one of the things Jordan Peterson talks about, is the hierarchy of society is natural. It's not just made up. It's natural. And it should be that way. But it also should incorporate love and charity, which are actually in the Greek are the same word, and compassion and all those things. But when, you know, in Mark 7, when they came to Jesus and they asked him, why don't you guys wash your hands like we require people to do, along with a lot of other traditions, Jesus didn't explain to them. He scolded them, called them hypocrites. That they think they have transplanted the keeping of the commandments of God with their own traditions. And that's what, every time anybody wants to talk to you about food laws and keeping the Sabbath, you know, and all these things, that's a dangerous, slippery slope. Now, I love to talk about those things, and like I say, as a personal discipline, you certainly can keep the food laws. It wouldn't hurt you, probably. But also I explained in that show on the Avatar that what if, you know, where does it say thou shalt not eat GMOs? Where does it say thou shalt not eat 3 quarts of sugar a day? What does it say in the food laws about Hostess Twinkies, you know, which are probably not good for you? Can you eat those things with impunity? No. Food laws are trying to explain. And, you know, in that show, and I noticed I did this, I referred to what commandment are you breaking, commandment of God are you breaking when you eat pork in Canaan? Well, when we come back, I will tell you. And I mentioned one in that, but you're actually breaking 2 commandments when you eat pork in Canaan.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188. The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet. or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the Internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
So welcome back to Keys of the Kingdom. So if the Ten Commandments are the laws of God, and the statutes of Moses are trying to explain to you what it means to keep the laws of God, he's not making up new laws. He's a lawgiver because he gave you the law of God. He created these statutes, which keeps beside that covenant, to help you understand the laws of God. So what commandment were you in violation of when you ate pork in Canaan? Now, again, I set the picture in Canaan, and archaeologists will verify this, that there, for hundreds of years there were pork bones all over Canaan. And you can actually, they've tested the feces that they find in some of these places where they know that they go down to the microbial level and find out that these people were just ridden with parasites. The bones that they find in the graves and stuff like that show that the people were debilitated. They weren't living to much more than 40s. That was an old man. I actually saw an old man the other day, and he kind of reminds me of the stagecoach driver in the Maverick that came out not too long ago. I guess it was actually kind of a while ago, but where everybody kept asking him how he was doing because he's this old guy, and of course he ends up dying on the stagecoach. But this guy, he looks like that guy, and he's frail and old. I mean, he's like 10 years younger than me. And he's bent over. He can't do hardly any work, and he's way younger. And I'm just astounded. I said, like, what happened to him? Well, life happens. That's what happens to him. But in Canaan, that was common for somebody at 40 to look like that, all falling apart, all degenerated, all crippled up, couldn't walk straight. Along come the Israelites. And these guys are big, and compared to the Canaanites, and they're strong, and they're healthy, and you find out that they're 60 years old and 70 years old, and they have 10 sons, and their sons have sons. Every family's like an army, and they're all together, and if you poke one of them with a stick, 20 of them show up. So they said, these guys, and they're wealthy. They're carrying around, they have silver and gold, and everyone has a sword, and they're doing great as a people. And they say, wow. Canaan was still in the jurisdiction of Egypt at that time. Israel never left the jurisdiction of Egypt physically. they were still, because Canaan was still actually paying homage, you can call it, to Egypt to protect them, because they couldn't put together an army, and there were Amalekites and Amaleks around, and because they couldn't police everything. But if the Amaleks and Amalekites attack the Canaanites, Egypt would come after them. They would send regiment or something out there to beat the tar out of them. So they kind of stayed away. But Egypt would not protect the Israelites. They had to protect themselves, and they did a pretty good job of that. And they were pretty amazing. So that suddenly the Canaanites say, the Egyptians, they take like 6 months to get here, or a year and a half if we start having trouble. And they're not very responsive. Israelites, if you're just standing next to them, ain't nobody going to mess with you, because the Israelites had to protect the stranger in their midst. They were about justice. They were not about loyalty to some king or ruler or flag. They were about loyalty to justice and righteousness. They were the good Samaritans of their day. So anyway, what happened, if archaeologists say all the pork bones disappeared there at one given time. They just real quick, within a generation, there was hardly any pork around at all. Because the Israelite wouldn't have anything to do with anybody who was raising and eating pork. And so Canaanites learned to eat sheep, and they got rid of their pigs. And their generations got healthier and healthier because of the fact their pigs were ridden with disease and parasites, and it was killing them as a society. And they would rather be friends with Israel. Now, there were some who fought against Israel, but it was just to maintain their own balance of power. And the people didn't support that, because the archaeologists will also tell you that there was no evidence of a violent invasion during this time where the individual villages and dwellings started, the pork bones started disappearing from those villages and dwellings. There's no evidence of a violent takeover, yet we hear about battles. So who's battling who? Well, it's simply the people who were in power wanted to battle against Israel, unrighteously battle against them, and which is a big mistake. The people actually said, I want some of that, what the Israel's doing. And they didn't come in as an oppressive group. People don't understand that. And, of course, you're not going to get that from, what were they doing that made them so wealthy, so healthy, so viable as a community, so strong, so virile? And, what were they doing as a community? Oh, they all believed in something. No, they were actually all doing something. They cared about one another. So if you, knowing that if we eat this pork, if we handle, even touch the Canaanites, we could pick up these parasites. I mean, we had to wash if we came near them, and we had to wash our feet if we walked out amongst them, and then wash our hands before we eat anything, because, everywhere you went, these parasites were everywhere. They had to cleanse the land and get rid of them because of all these habits that they had in that society. And so what was the commandment that you would break if you ate that pork and touched those people? Well, at least you would be adulterating your body. Also, you would be going against God, because you would be adulterating your body. You would be jeopardizing your body. So, and that's actually what a lot of people don't understand. Thou shalt not commit adultery means you don't adulterate the flesh. It's not just about, your relationship with your wife. It's about adulterating your flesh, and you can do that with lots of things besides pork. But they don't mention them because some of them hadn't been invented yet. So you would not be abusing yourself physically. But the other commandment is thou shalt not kill, because you could literally kill yourself. If you have extramarital relationships these days, you could end up bringing home AIDS or syphilis or gonorrhea to your family. So now it's not that you just committed adultery, but you actually murdered your wife or your husband with your extramarital affairs. Wow. Maybe your children. It will pass on to your children. So, yeah, you can break multiple commandments by violating a single statute. But the statutes, what they're trying to do is explain the principles of the commandments. And so we come to the commandment that tells me whether or not you really love your neighbor as yourself. Do you covet your neighbor's goods? Do you hire men to take away from your neighbor? To take away from your neighbor's children by borrowing against the future, violating the thou shalt, keep holy the Sabbath, because you're borrowing against the future. You didn't earn that. You're taking your rest today, and you say, well, I'll pay you back tomorrow. See, so people are violating the commandments, yet they're up there in the church, and they're preaching to us about the apostate church. They are the apostate church. They're under a strong delusion. They're not doing what Christ said. So anyway, they're actually poisoning your mind with the idea that it's okay to covet your neighbor's goods as long as you do it through government. They are getting you to commit adultery by going to the fathers of the earth and saying, please take care of my social welfare. I don't care how you do it. You can take away from my neighbor as much as you need to. You can borrow against the future as much as you need to, but I want to be taken care of now. I know Social Security is bankrupt. I still want to be taken care of now. So if I say, okay, so that makes it a sin or missing the mark, that's what sin is, missing the mark. So you're taking these government benefits, you're taking that government check to take care of your sons or your daughters or your parents or whoever it is in your family, instead of you gathering together and sitting down in tens and ranks of hundreds and ranks of 50. Instead of doing that, you're taking from the fathers of the earth to provide for the welfare of your family or yourself or your neighbor, rather than sit down in the tens, fifties, hundreds, and thousands to take care of one another. See, that's why Jesus condemned those who said they were doing great things in his name. Say, get you from me. I know you're not. I never knew you. You're not doing. Oh, you've got this doctrine right, and you got that doctrine right, but those are all doctrines of men, fabricated by the Bible, but missing the very essence of the Bible, which we see with Abraham, which we see with Moses, we see with Gideon, we see with the Israelites, we see. And where do we see these straying? What was the sin of Saul? The sin of the people was electing Saul. Trump Saul. Whatever. It doesn't really matter. That was the sin of the people, because they were looking to men who exercised authority to provide, because they didn't want to be ruled over by God. They'd already rejected God. They'd already turned their back on God. And so they couldn't see how stupid this was. And that's why it's so amazing when you read Samuel 8, he's saying, look, if you go this way, he's going to take, and then you're going to cry out, and I'm not even going to hear you. And they say, give us a king anyway. And he said, well, how could they? He just explained it. Well, they couldn't see. That's why, you look out at the liberals today, and they don't seem to be bothered with facts. They don't seem to be bothered. They can't see. They can't see their unreasonableness. But the truth is, you look out amongst the conservatives, and they can't see their unreasonableness, because they're still going to the men who exercise authority one over the other to provide for their welfare. They're still electing a king that they think is going to solve all their problems. So what was the foolishness of Saul? What was it that was going to cause his kingdom to fall, to fail? He forced an offering. And all these governments of the world still force an offering. What was the difference between John the Baptist and all the governments of the world? Is that he said, no, we don't do it by force. We do it by charity. Sharing. Which brings me to another topic. I saw a video, and this is all going to be related. Of course, it's all related to the same thing I talk about every week, but I try to bring in different aspects. I saw an experiment with rats. They put rats in a little cylindrical plastic cage inside a cage, and there was trap doors at the end where you could, a rat on the outside could lift that door and let the other rat out. And they put one rat in that, another rat in the cage where it could go around, and it could release the first rat. And it would learn to do it. It would go around and try and push on things and try to figure out how to release that rat, and eventually it would release that rat, and it would go in there and say, okay, you can get out now kind of thing, and then they would both get out. Because they said that the rat sensed the stress of the rat, the exterior rat, sensed the stress of the rat that was trapped in this little cylinder. And so he worked at trying to figure out how to get him out. And he figured out how to do it. So he was good at it. So then they tried the experiment again, where they injected the exterior rat, with diazepam, which you can use to treat depression. Because, see, what's happening is he's sensing the anxiety of the rat who's trapped. He's in there trapped. He can't move hardly. He can't eat anything. And he begins to become stressed. How do I get out of this? There's no way out. I can't even turn around. I'm just trapped. And he tries to figure out, how can I get this rat out? Because I'm getting anxious because my fellow rat is snared, trapped. So I'm trying to figure out how to get him out. And he goes around until he figures out how to get him out of that little cylindrical trap. But if he gives them diazepam, which helps him with his anxiety, he doesn't try to do it. He goes around and he, wanders around in the cage, and he'll even eat, but he doesn't try to get his rat buddy out. He ignores him. He's fine with his, and he gets more and more anxious because the other one in the little cylindrical trap, he doesn't get any diazepam, so he's anxious and he's trying to figure out how to get out. And the other rat knows how to do it, but he won't do it. He's not interested. He's okay. He doesn't feel the stress. And so what in reality, and we've talked about this before, is that you have hormones in your physical body. And those hormones will release and create stress. And then if you do something to resolve that stress, the body will secrete counter hormones that give you a good feeling. And so you will do this. I mean, this is, if you don't procreate, if you don't create children, your species will die out. I come from a long line of people who produce children. I can guarantee that. I don't even have to do a ancestor tree. I know I come from a long line of people who had children. I guess that's how you get here. That's how society is reborn, in the family. Now, there's a lot of people who are giving birth to children outside of the family, but that's unnatural. That causes problems. And statistics will bear that out. You don't have to argue with me. You can argue with the statistics. Single-parent families have a tremendously high rate of difficulties. There are kids who survive that and do well. But statistically, you've got a strike against you if you're a single-parent family. Now, if you're a single-parent family with a strong family and the family are all helping one another to survive, that will counter the fact that the father isn't there or the mother isn't there, because you have uncles stepping in and aunts stepping in to play those roles, and that's good. That will still produce a healthy society. But if you have the government saying, you don't need your uncles, you don't need your aunts, you don't need a father or a mother, you just need somebody to babysit you. I mean, and I give you all the different examples, and statistically this is destroying society. So what it is government welfare is the diazepam in the modern rat race. You don't have to take care of your sister's son when her husband dies or leaves her or whatever. You don't have to be there. Government will do it. You don't have to take care of your parents. You have to do no more ought for your parents, because the government will do it. Now, you don't have to tell your parents, stop taking Social Security. It's their choice. But I tell you that if people were to gather together in the tens, fifties, hundreds, and thousands to become independent of that system, they would see the results coming about in their community. And that's where you want to go. That's where you want to head. It's a process. It may take some time. But that's why Jesus was teaching the people early on to sit down in the tens and gather together in these groups, thousands of them. See, everybody wants you to go to these big churches. They want you to sign on to their live feed and hear their sermons and tie it to, so you're sending all this money to some big preacher who sits up there and talks and says what you think you need to hear. Jesus didn't come telling you what you think you need to hear. He told you what you need to hear, and what you needed to hear, evidently, when it came to the Pharisees, is that you're hypocrites. You have replaced the words of God, the laws of God, with the statutes of men. And you have to stop doing that. It makes you feel good. Wait, but the checklist people now. I've got a grandson. He's a checklist guy. He wants a list of things that he has to get done, a list of his chores, and he goes and does it, and it's done. And he likes it. He gets a little adrenaline because he got that done. And he goes and gets it. And I got another grandson who he gets his adrenaline a little bit different. He doesn't necessarily like his list. He's developed his own little path, but he still wants that approval of somebody, or somebody says, "Oh, you did good." He needs that. The other guy just needs to cross it off the list. But the one grandson, he needs to hear, "You did good." You had approval. I had a son who was that way. I probably got a couple that are that way. One's a little bit more extroverted, and the other one's a little bit more introverted. At least that's the way it appears. And the fact is, they're developing now. I see in my grandsons and granddaughters, they're developing patterns of behavior, and those will be with them forever. And they will not be equal in their different skills, and that's good, because they will be versatile within to some degree, where they can do a lot of different things. All of them are pretty smart, but they will specialize, and they will be better at this, and some will be better at that. I got one grandson. He is an action guy. He will jump in, and he has a sense of justice, and he's kind of fearless. I got a couple of grandsons who are kind of fearless, and they will play important roles in the community. But I got others who are deeper thinkers and contemplate and analyze and divide, a problem up into manageable segments and then resolves the issues. And that's talent too. So you get all kinds of people in the kingdom. But what is the common factor? People say, oh, well, they keep the Sabbath. Well, they probably don't, as we've just explained. They probably don't keep the Sabbath. They keep some day that they count up to in some calendar, and they say, well, we kept the Sabbath. But they don't. And like I pointed out, is that the church met on Sunday. But yet we know that the early church was mostly Jews, and they kept the Sabbath. So, but people argue, no, we're supposed to meet on Sunday. We're not supposed to meet on the Sabbath because the Pope changed it. What they changed is what the Sabbath is and what Sunday was. Sunday was a day to begin to tend to the daily ministration and to make sure that the people were sitting down in the tens, hundreds and fifties, and thousands and 5,000s. That was what Sunday was for. Sabbath was still the day of rest. So you say, we're going to have church at home. You don't even know what you're talking about. What is church at home? How do you have the called out at home? See, you've changed the meaning of all these words, religion, church, everything. But anyway, we'll explain all that.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.